Have you ever loved someone so deeply, only to discover they were boldly betraying you right in front of your eyes? This is not just a story of infidelity. It's about calculated revenge that stripped everything away from the one who thought she could have it all. Stay with me, because before the end, you'll see how a calm, quiet man turned every piece of her arrogance into her downfall. You're watching Cheating Stories 7. If you enjoy stories of betrayal, revenge, and karmic payback, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's step into the storm together. With my wife's betrayal was brazen, but my revenge left her with nothing. The call came at 2:07 p.m., clipped and careful as if she had rehearsed it. "Can you meet me at Cedarwood Tavern at 3?" Vanessa asked. No greeting, no explanation, just the name of the place where we had first met 13 years ago when a jukebox played a love song that pretended to be a sign. "3 works," I replied, letting the silence linger until she exhaled a small, relieved breath. Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long moment, long enough for my coffee to cool and my office to feel too tidy, too staged, like a showroom version of my life. Lately, everything had that polished shine. Neatly organized calendars, smiling school photos lined up on the credenza, a row of clean mugs, all pretending to be proof that a marriage was fine. The signs had crept in slowly, like a cold draft I couldn't locate. New dresses hidden at the back of her closet, tags removed but never worn for me. Late nights that bled into early mornings because the campaign needed her, the client needed her, the boss needed her. Dinners where it was just me and the kids, Noah narrating his science project while Lily rolled her eyes and asked if anyone had ever died of boredom. Vanessa would text a heart at 8:43, arrive at 9:10 with a store-bought dessert, kiss each child on the head and kiss me on the air. I told myself this was simply how marriages aged, familiarity replacing fire, routine replacing risk. But my father had a different theory. He used to say the truth shows up like an unpaid bill. It always arrives, and it always wants more than you plan to give. He taught me what to do when it knocked. Say little, watch closely, collect the facts as if you were counting cash, never spend a word you can't afford. I kept hearing his words as I cleaned my desk, told my assistant I'd be out, locked my computer, and headed for the parking lot. The sun was too bright for a Tuesday, the kind of glare that strips everything down to its edges. I took mental inventory, phone fully charged, voice recorder app ready, spare pen, spare patience. Then I drove the 6 blocks to Cedarwood with my father's lesson steady in my chest like a slow drumbeat. Cedarwood Tavern hadn't changed. Same wood-paneled walls, same framed black and white photo of a 70s baseball team. Same bar stools older than most of the beer labels. The air smelled of citrus cleaner and old laughter. A few regulars hunched into their own stories. The bartender, broad-shouldered and bored, wiped the counter in precise circles without looking up. She was already there in a corner booth once claimed by a younger version of us. Vanessa wore a sea glass green blouse I'd never seen before, a shade that softened her eyes in a way they hadn't been in months. Beside her sat a man I'd only glimpsed in passing, the coworker she'd mentioned by title but never by name, the one who came with a shrug every time. She saw me, raised, but didn't smile. The man turned halfway, measuring me with the bland confidence of someone used to being called charming by people who needed something from him. I crossed the room as slowly as a man walking past a mirror he no longer trusted. When I reached the booth, she said my name in the polite tone you'd use for a neighbor you sometimes borrowed sugar from. "Vanessa," I replied, balancing our names evenly on an invisible scale. There were a dozen things I could have done. Slam a fist on the table, demand answers, give the bartender a story to tell when the night got slow. Instead, I slid into the opposite bench, set my phone on the table face down, recorder already running. The man's eyes flicked to it, then back to me. He didn't recognize the strategy, only the stillness. "I asked you here," Vanessa began, then stopped. Her fingers worked at the seam of the menu like it was a loose thread. "Because I don't want to keep hiding." She glanced at him. He nodded, a small, steadying motion that said, "Go on, I'm here, I'm good in a crisis, watch me be good." The bartender came over. "What can I get you?" he asked, unbothered by the tension thickening the air. "Whatever's on tap," I said. "Same," the man added as if we were teammates. Vanessa asked for water, no ice. She always ordered ice. I filed that away. Noah would be in his last period science class, fine-tuning his model volcano. Lily would be pretending to read a novel she'd finish in one night. She loved the part where the secret finally cost everyone something. I wondered briefly what it would cost them when this was over. Then I pushed the thought away. First facts, then fallout. "I want to be honest." Vanessa tried again, her gaze steady, her voice rehearsed. "I don't want to leave our family, but I can't keep pretending nothing's happening. It isn't fair to you. Truth rarely travels with fairness. It arrives with a bill." The bartender set my beer down. I didn't touch it yet. "This is Ryan," she said, so the coworker had a name. "We've been seeing each other." Her words were careful, built like a bridge meant to hold just one crossing. Ryan rested his arm along the back of the booth, a casual pose too deliberate to be natural. "I thought it was better to say it out loud," he said warmly, without heat. "To respect you. Respect is a strange word to use while you pocket someone else's life." I watched condensation slide down the glass and let silence do more work than anger could. My father always said that when you stop talking, the one who wants the upper hand will over-explain. Give them the rope, they'll measure it themselves. Vanessa filled the space. "I still love you," she said quickly, panic flickering in her voice. "I do, but what I have with Ryan is different. I thought maybe if you knew we could set rules. No lies, our family stays intact. You won't lose anything." When someone says you won't lose anything, check your pockets. I finally lifted the glass. The beer was cold and ordinary, which felt like mercy. I took one sip, set it down, let the recorder take its tiny, faithful notes. Vanessa swallowed. Ryan's leg jittered and stilled. The bartender lingered nearby, close enough to hear if he wanted to. I thought of my children, how I would tell them only the truth they could carry. I thought of my father, who taught me that the calmest man in the room isn't without fear. He's the one with a plan. When I stood, neither of them expected it. "I'll be in touch," I said, leaving the rest unspoken. Outside, the afternoon light felt cleaner than it had an hour ago. I breathed deep. The first move was theirs. The next moves would be mine, and I had more than enough rope. It's strange how suspicion doesn't arrive with a scream. It comes as a murmur, a quiet, nagging whisper that lingers at the edges of your thoughts. Mine had been whispering for months, curling into my mind at odd hours, refusing to let go. It started small. Vanessa's work hours stretching later into the night. Her text messages becoming short, transactional, stripped of warmth. Her laugh, once easy and contagious, now a rare sound, like an old song you almost forget the words to. The clothes were the first undeniable sign. Blouses and dresses I had never seen before began appearing in the back of her closet. They were bold, low-cut necklines, silk that would slide against skin, nothing she had ever worn for me. The tags disappeared, but those clothes never showed up at our dinners, never came along on our weekends. They existed only in her private world, wherever that was. Then came the dinners themselves. There was a time when all four of us, me, Vanessa, Noah, and Lily would gather around the table over plates of pasta or takeout from the little Thai place down the street. The kids would talk over each other, and Vanessa would smile, join in, ask about their day. Now, more often than not, it was just me and the kids. We filled the quiet with homework talk, with Noah's excitement about his science projects, with Lily's sarcastic one-liners. Vanessa would arrive late, carrying a store-bought dessert as if a plastic container of cupcakes could erase her absence. She'd kiss the kids on the head, offer me a polite nod, and disappear into her phone. Even when she was physically in the house, she wasn't truly there. Her phone became an extra limb, always face down, always within reach. She carried it to the bathroom, to the laundry room, even into the garden when she claimed she was checking the weather. Conversations with me became shallow waters, safe, bland, impossible to drown in. The intimacy between us was the last thread to unravel. She would slide into bed late, smelling faintly of a perfume I didn't recognize. Her back would turn before I could speak. If I reached for her, she'd murmur about exhaustion, deadlines, or headaches that seemed to vanish the moment she drifted into sleep. I told myself not to leap to conclusions. My father's voice echoed in my head. Don't act on shadows. Wait until they cast a shape you can measure. But these shadows were growing bolder. They were starting to form a shape I couldn't ignore. Every sign was a small betrayal in itself, each one daring me to call it out. And though I kept my silence, I began keeping mental notes, dates, times, subtle changes in her routine. I didn't know it yet, but these fragments were becoming the scaffolding of something bigger. A plan, one I would carry out to the letter. When I was 12, my father sat me down at the old kitchen table, a half-empty cup of black coffee between us, and told me something I wouldn't truly understand until decades later. "Ethan," he said, "never start swinging until you know exactly where the target is. Most men ruin themselves by hitting too soon and too blind." At 12, I thought he was talking about the schoolyard fights I sometimes got into. At 43, I knew he had been speaking about life and about betrayal. My father was a quiet man, but never a passive one. He believed in the power of stillness. "People think silence is weakness," he would say. But silence is a room where your opponent starts talking to themselves. And when they do, they tell you everything you need to know. I carried that lesson into my business life. In negotiations, I'd let the other side fill the empty space with their own nerves, and in those words, I'd find the cracks to pry open. I'd won contracts worth millions by keeping my mouth shut just long enough for someone else to show me exactly how to beat them. Now, sitting in my car outside Cedarwood Tavern, I could feel him beside me again, his voice calm, precise, steadying my pulse before I walked into the storm. The temptation to rush in, to demand answers, to watch her squirm. It was almost physical, but my father's rule was clear. Don't give them your anger. Don't give them your fear. Give them the rope, and they'll hang themselves. I pulled my phone from my pocket, checked the voice recorder app again, and tested it with a quiet test into the mic. The file saved instantly. It was a small thing, but it made me feel prepared, armed even. I knew my father would have approved. He had always told me, evidence is the only truth that matters when it's your word against theirs. The irony wasn't lost on me. Walking into the same bar where I had first met my wife, now carrying the proof I would need to end our marriage. Life has a way of circling back to its own landmarks, just to show you how much has changed. I leaned back in the seat for a moment, letting my breathing slow until the rhythm felt deliberate. I could almost feel the weight of his hand on my shoulder, grounding me. He wasn't here to see what she had done, but his advice was the reason I wouldn't stumble through this like a wounded man. I would walk in calm. I would stay quiet. And I would walk out with everything I needed to burn her lies to the ground. The door to Cedarwood Tavern opened with that familiar creak, the kind of sound that feels like an old friend warning you before you walk in. The smell hit me first, beer, lemon cleaner, and the faint tang of fryer oil, unchanged since the night Vanessa and I first met here years ago. It was quiet for a Tuesday afternoon. A few men sat at the bar, nursing half-empty glasses, their eyes fixed on the muted TV above the shelves of liquor. The bartender, a broad-shouldered man with a neatly kept beard, glanced up at me with polite disinterest before going back to wiping the counter in slow, precise circles. And there she was, Vanessa, tucked into the far corner booth as if she owned the space. She wore a sea-glass green blouse I had never seen before, the exact shade that made her eyes softer, more deliberate, as though she had dressed to be remembered. Across from her sat Ryan Cole, his arm draped casually along the back of the booth, posture loose but his gaze sharp when it met mine. "Ethan," Vanessa said as I approached. Just my name, not hey, not hi, honey. It landed with the measured weight of a business greeting. "Vanessa," I returned, my voice steady as I slid into the bench opposite them. My phone rested face down on the table, the recorder already running. Ryan gave a faint smile. "You want me to call you Ethan or Mr. Blake?" His tone was practiced, rehearsed for charm. "You can call me whatever you like," I said evenly, not giving him a hook to pull on. The bartender wandered over, holding a notepad loosely. "What can I get you?" "Draft, whatever's cold," I told him. "Same," Ryan added as if we were teammates sharing a round. Vanessa ordered water, no ice, a choice so unusual for her that I tucked it away like a puzzle piece. Ryan leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the table. "We asked you here because, well, it's time you knew. Vanessa and we've been seeing each other for a while now. She's tired of sneaking around, and I told her it's better to be honest." Vanessa reached for my gaze. "I don't want to hurt you, Ethan. I'm not leaving our family, but what I have with Ryan, I can't give up. I thought you deserved to know." I took a slow sip when my beer arrived, letting the silence between us stretch, letting it do the work my words didn't need to. My father's voice was in my head. "Hold the rope steady, and they'll do the pulling themselves." Ryan shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with my lack of reaction. "Look, I know this isn't easy, but we're trying to do the right thing here." "The right thing?" I almost laughed, but kept my face neutral. Vanessa, misreading my stillness, began to fill the air with justifications, rules we could set, ways to keep the family whole, promises that I wouldn't lose anything. Every sentence was another stone in the wall she was building between us. I didn't interrupt. I wanted every word preserved on that recording, a perfect record of her arrogance disguised as honesty. When my glass was empty, I set it down gently, pushed back from the table, and stood. "I'll be in touch," I said simply, letting the words hang like a shadow over the booth. Their confusion followed me as I turned and walked out into the late afternoon light. The first move was theirs. The next moves would be mine. The air outside was crisp, but it did nothing to cool the heat running under my skin. I had left the bar without slamming the door, without raising my voice, exactly the way my father would have wanted. But as I reached my car, I heard her voice calling after me. "Ethan, wait." I stopped, not because I wanted to, but because I wanted to see just how far she would go when the stage was hers. Vanessa caught up, heels clicking against the pavement, each step a deliberate echo. Her blouse shimmered faintly under the afternoon light, the same blouse she had worn while telling me she loved another man. She stood in front of me, arms folded, lips pressed together in that mock-serious way she used when explaining herself to the kids after they caught her in a lie. "I don't want you to think this means I don't love you," she began, her voice smooth, controlled, practiced. "You're a good man, Ethan, the best. But what I have with Ryan, it's different. He excites me in ways you don't anymore." The words rolled off her tongue as if she were proposing a change in dinner plans. "And yet," she continued, "I still want us, the kids, our home, you. I'm not asking you to give anything up. I'm asking you to share. Share as if I were a parking space. You'd still be my husband," she said earnestly, "and I'd still be yours. You'd be my number one. He's just part of another part of me, a part I can't give up." Her eyes searched mine for something, agreement, maybe relief. She must have thought she was offering me an enlightened, modern arrangement. I didn't answer. The recorder in my pocket was still running, catching every syllable of her proposal, a speech that would serve as evidence the day I dismantled her in court. She mistook my silence for hesitation and stepped closer. "Ethan, this doesn't have to end. We can make it work. Honesty is better than sneaking around, isn't it?" That almost made me laugh out loud. Breaking vows in the daylight wasn't honesty, it was arrogance without the courtesy of secrecy. I looked at her for a long moment, letting the quiet stretch until she shifted uncomfortably. Then I gave her the smallest smile I could manage. "You've made yourself clear." Her face softened as if she believed I had accepted her terms. I brushed past her, opened my card, and slid inside. As I drove away, I realized she had just given me more than I had hoped for. Not only a confession of betrayal, but a perfect snapshot of the kind of mind I was dealing with. And that was exactly the kind of mind that never saw the knife until it was already in their back. The drive home felt different, not lighter but steadier, as if the steering wheel itself understood that I was no longer stumbling in the dark. I had what I needed now. Her own words, her tone, the smug belief that she could keep both me and him without consequence. The street slid past in a blur of stoplights, storefronts, and late afternoon shadows, but my mind was razor sharp, cataloging every detail of the encounter. The green blouse, the way Ryan's arm had rested so casually behind her. The exact phrase, "You'd still be my number one." Every word and image was fuel, and I was already thinking about how I would burn it. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same. White siding, trimmed hedges, the porch light still out from last week's dead bulb. But stepping inside, I felt how little of it belonged to me anymore. Vanessa's shoes were scattered near the door. Her perfume lingered faintly in the air, the scent of someone who now belonged to another man. The kids were in the living room. Noah sat cross-legged on the carpet, building a Lego tower that leaned dangerously to one side. Lily was curled up with a book, her hair falling across her face. They both looked up when they saw me. "Hey, Dad," Noah grinned, holding up his wobbly creation. "It's a skyscraper." "Looks like it's about to fall over," I said, kneeling to steady it. I kissed the top of Lily's head. "What are you reading?" "Some mystery," she murmured without looking up. "The butler did it, obviously." I chuckled, letting myself stay in that moment with them for a few minutes. They didn't need to know what had just happened, not yet. Dinner that night was simple, grilled cheese and tomato soup. Vanessa wasn't home, which was a relief. The kids chattered about school, about a field trip planned for next month, about the neighbor's dog that had learned to roll over. I stored away every laugh, every casual bite of normalcy, because I knew the weekend ahead would change everything. After we finished the dishes, I said, "How about a little trip this weekend? Aunt Linda and Uncle Jack are going camping, and I thought you two might want to join them." Noah's eyes lit up. "Yes." Lily actually looked up from her book. "Can we make s'mores?" "As many as you can eat," I said. They didn't ask why. They didn't need to. I had arranged it in my head before I'd even left the tavern. With them safe at Linda's, I would have the space and time to set my plan in motion. That night, after they were asleep, I stood at the window looking out over the dark yard. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to mean peace. Now it felt like the pause before a storm. And I wasn't afraid of the storm anymore. Saturday morning broke with the scent of fresh coffee and the rustle of backpacks being zipped. Noah darted back and forth between his room and the front door, piling gear he thought he might need for camping. A flashlight nearly the length of his forearm, 2 different baseball caps, and a packet of beef jerky he had swiped from the pantry. Lily was more methodical, folding clothes into neat stacks, tucking her favorite book into the top of the bag like it was the most important survival tool of all. She moved with quiet precision, not in a rush, but with the certainty of someone who wanted to be prepared for anything. I moved through the house with deliberate calm, checking the details twice. Linda and Jack were already on board. I had called them the night before under the pretense of giving the kids a fun weekend away. Linda sounded delighted, her voice bright and easy. Jack, ever the tactician from his army days, had asked just one question. "Everything okay, Ethan?" The truth, no, but I told him enough to make him understand this wasn't a request for help, it was a request for time. They pulled into the driveway a little before 9, their old pickup rumbling like a familiar song. Linda hopped out first, arms open wide for the kids. Jack followed at an easier pace, his eyes scanning me in that wordless way men do when they already know there's more to the story. "Ready for adventure?" Linda beamed, guiding Noah and Lily toward the truck. "They've been ready since they woke up," I said with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. Jack lingered near the tailgate as Linda got the kids settled in the back. "You sure you're good?" he asked quietly. "I will be," I replied. "This situation is about to change." He gave a slow, deliberate nod, the kind that promised he wouldn't pry but would be there if I called. Vanessa wasn't home to see them off. She claimed she had errands to run, but I knew she wouldn't have asked where the kids were going anyway. Lately, her interest in them seemed to extend only to whether they'd be out of the house. That absence of concern had shifted something deep in me. When the truck finally pulled away, Noah waving from the back seat, I felt a fraction of the weight in my chest ease. They were safe for the weekend, away from the storm I was about to unleash. I went back inside, the house unnaturally still without their voices. My phone was already in my hand before I'd even taken off my jacket. There was a call to make, to Harold Price, the kind of attorney who didn't just fight battles but ended them before the other side even knew they had begun. With the kids gone, the board was clear. It was time to start moving my pieces. Harold Price's office smelled of leather, old books, and the faint bite of expensive whiskey. It wasn't the kind of sterile, glass-walled law firm you see in corporate districts. No reception desk with rehearsed smiles, no fluorescent lighting. Harold didn't need the trappings. The man himself was enough. At 70, he still moved like a predator in a room full of prey, slow when he wanted to unsettle, quick when he wanted to strike. We'd worked together years ago on a contract dispute, and I'd never forgotten the way he dismantled the opposing counsel without ever raising his voice. He looked up from a stack of folders as I stepped inside. "Ethan," he said, rising to shake my hand, "you don't call unless it's serious." "It's serious," I replied, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. I placed my phone on the table, opened the recorder app, and hit play. For the next 3 minutes, Harold listened to Vanessa's voice. Her arrangement with Ryan laid out in her own words. He didn't interrupt. He didn't even raise an eyebrow. The only sound was the quiet click of a pen between his fingers. When the recording ended, I slid a small envelope across the desk. Inside were photographs from the night before, Ryan and Vanessa tangled together in my living room, time-stamped, clear enough to make denial impossible. Harold studied each photo carefully before leaning back in his chair. "This isn't just adultery, Ethan. This is a gift. You've got a verbal confession, photographic evidence, and if I'm not mistaken, witnesses." "2," I confirmed. "The bartender at Cedarwood and my neighbor Rex. He saw Ryan's car in the driveway, both willing to testify." A slow smile formed on Harold's face. "Then we hit them hard and fast. This isn't a no-fault state. With what you've got, we can make sure she doesn't touch your assets. And as for him," he tapped the photos, "if he has anything to lose, we'll make sure he loses it." "I want the papers served at work," I said. "In public, maximum humiliation." Harold didn't blink. "We'll time it for late Monday morning, right before lunch when the most people are around. I'll have a PI deliver the package to him the same hour, restraining orders for both, barring them from the house. That way, you control the field before they can even make a move." I nodded. This was why Harold was my first call. He didn't just understand winning, he understood the spectacle of winning. "I'll also forward everything to Ryan's wife," Harold added casually. "If he's married, she'll be an ally in this whether she wants to be or not." "She will," I said. "She just doesn't know it yet." Harold jotted a note on his legal pad, his handwriting sharp and decisive. "By Monday afternoon, Ethan, you'll be the only person in this marriage who still lives here. The rest will be history." I stood, shaking his hand again. "Then let's make some history." The plan Harold and I had crafted gave me a steel edge I hadn't felt in months. Every move was now on the board, every piece set in its place. All I had to do was follow through. That evening on my way home, I took a detour, a habit I'd developed lately, not out of paranoia, but out of curiosity. The sun was sliding low, painting the sky in streaks of amber and deepening blue when I turned the corner onto our street. And there it was, parked bold as daylight in my driveway, a black sedan I didn't recognize at first glance. But the license plate clicked in my memory. Ryan Coles. The sight didn't make me speed up or slam the brakes. Instead, I slowed, letting the moment sharpen around me. I pulled to the curb 2 houses down, kept the engine idling, and locked my eyes on my own front door. A voice broke the quiet. "That yours?" I turned to see Rex, my neighbor, rolling his trash bin to the curb, still in his police uniform. "Perfect." "Not mine," I said casually, stepping out of the car. "Friend of the family." Rex's gaze lingered on the sedan. "Ran the plates once, habit. Belongs to some guy over on the east side. Didn't seem like a family man." He smirked. That was as good as a sworn statement to me. "Appreciate the info," I said, lowering my voice. "Might need you to remember this later." He gave a knowing nod, the kind that said, "You didn't hear it from me, but I'll back you up if it counts." Then he wheeled the bin back toward his house, leaving me alone with the scene. The house was dark from the front, but I knew where they'd be. I slipped quietly into the side yard, my shoes soft against the grass, and eased toward the backyard. From there, the sliding glass doors gave me a perfect, unfiltered view into the living room. And there they were. Vanessa, on her knees on the couch. Ryan behind her, his shirt open, moving like he owned the place. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I pulled out my phone, camera already ready, and began taking photos, frame after frame, each one time-stamped, each one a nail in the coffin. 10 shots later, I slid the phone back into my pocket. The urge to storm in was strong, but rage without purpose is just noise, and I wasn't here for noise. I was here for proof. I backed away, circled to the front of the house, and entered through the garage. I made just enough noise with the door and my footsteps to announce my presence. I wanted them to know I was home, to feel the heat of being caught without yet understanding how deep the trap was. From the living room came the muffled scramble of clothing, the shuffle of hurried feet. I didn't go in. Instead, I walked upstairs, each step slow, deliberate. The upper hand wasn't just mine, it was tightening. And they had no idea how much rope I still had left to give them. Upstairs, I kept the bedroom light off and crossed to the window overlooking the driveway. Ryan's black sedan was still parked there, its glossy paint catching the faint orange glow from the street lamp. Below, I could hear muted movement, drawers sliding, the faint creak of the couch being abandoned in a hurry. The kind of noises people make when they think they still have time to cover their tracks. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the photo gallery. The images were crisp, clear enough that even in court no one could claim mistaken identity. Vanessa's face was visible in at least 3 shots, Ryan's in 5. The timestamps matched perfectly with the moment I'd first seen that car in my driveway. I waited at the window, phone in hand, until the front door finally opened. Ryan stepped out first, adjusting his shirt like armor. Vanessa followed him to the door, her voice low, urgent. I couldn't catch the words, but the tone was sharp, half command, half plea. Ryan walked briskly to his car, never once glancing toward the house, eyes locked on the road ahead. The sedan roared to life, and seconds later his taillights faded into the distance. I stayed upstairs until the street was empty. Only then did I go down, moving through the quiet house like a man walking into enemy territory he already knew by heart. The air still held the mix of sweat and her perfume, 2 scents I would never again be able to separate. Vanessa was in the kitchen, the faucet running as she filled the kettle. She looked up when I entered, her expression shifting into something she probably thought was casual. "You're home early," she said. I didn't answer. I let the silence stretch just long enough for her to fidget with the kettle switch. "I was going to make some tea. Want one?" she offered. Still nothing. I walked past her to the coffee pot, poured myself a cup from what was left, and sat at the table. She shut off the water, dried her hands on a dish towel, and leaned against the counter. "Ethan, we can talk about this. You don't have to." I raised a hand, cutting her off mid-sentence. "Not tonight." Her eyes narrowed just a flicker before she looked away. She was frustrated, confused, but she said nothing else. I sipped my coffee slowly, knowing she couldn't tell whether I had seen anything or everything. That was the point. The photos in my pocket weren't just evidence. They were a loaded weapon, and when the time came, I would make sure she saw every single frame. I left the coffee half-finished on the table and walked away, letting the weight of my silence trail behind me like a shadow she couldn't shake. The stairs creaked under my steps, and I didn't care if she heard. In fact, I wanted her to hear, each sound a reminder that I was upstairs, not storming out, not yelling, not doing what she might expect. In the bedroom, I closed the door but didn't lock it. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, phone in hand, scrolling slowly through the photos I'd taken earlier. Each image was another brick in the wall I was building between us, a wall she wouldn't be able to climb when the time came. 15 minutes passed. I could hear her moving around downstairs, the kettle whistling and then shutting off, cupboard doors opening and closing, the faint scrape of a chair on the kitchen tile. She was restless. Good. Restless people make mistakes. I thought about going back down, confronting her right then, but that would give her a chance to start patching holes in her story. No better to let her twist a little longer. Let her believe maybe I hadn't seen anything. Let her think she'd gotten away with it. That's when people start to get careless. Another 15 minutes ticked by. The TV came on in the living room, too loud for the hour, like she wanted to fill the silence between us with anything other than thought. I imagined her sitting there, tea untouched, eyes flicking toward the stairs every time a floorboard popped. When I finally lay back, I wasn't tired. My mind was running calculations, timelines, witness statements, how each piece of evidence would play in court. Harold's voice from earlier echoed in my head. With what you've got, we can make sure she walks away with nothing. Downstairs, the TV clicked off. Footsteps moved toward the base of the stairs, then stopped. She didn't call my name. I almost smiled in the dark. She was waiting for me to make the first move. She'd be waiting a long time. By the time I heard the front door open the next morning, I'd already decided. I would give her the weekend to hang herself a little more. And then Monday, I would bring the hammer down, and she would never see it coming. Sunday morning unfolded like any other, at least on the surface. The pale winter light seeped through the blinds, casting stripes across the hardwood floor. I could hear Vanessa in the kitchen, moving with a little too much energy for someone who claimed to have had a late night. By the time I came downstairs, she had already laid out breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and a pot of coffee. It was almost comical. She didn't usually make breakfast on weekends unless we had guests. "Morning," she said brightly, a touch too brightly. I nodded, sliding into my chair without returning the greeting. She poured coffee into my cup like we were any ordinary couple starting an ordinary day. "You've got plans today?" she asked, her voice casual but with a thread of tension hiding under it. "Some errands," I said. "Anything fun?" "No." The clink of her fork against her plate filled the quiet. She was fishing for information, for reassurance, for any sign of what I knew or didn't know. I let her have nothing. Halfway through breakfast, her phone buzzed on the counter. She didn't reach for it right away, just glanced at the screen, then kept her eyes on her plate. But I noticed the way her chewing slowed, the faint crease that appeared between her brows. "Ryan." I didn't have to see the name to know. "Want me to get that for you?" I asked, my tone perfectly neutral. She shook her head quickly. "No, it's fine." The phone stopped buzzing, then lit up again 30 seconds later. This time, she rose from the table, muttering something about checking the laundry, and disappeared into the hallway with her phone in hand. I sipped my coffee, listening to her voice drift back in fragments, soft, hurried, laced with the same tone she'd used with him in my living room. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. Every word she spoke now was another knot in the rope she was tying for herself. When she returned, she was all smiles again, as if nothing had happened. "I might go out later," she said, "just to pick up a few things." "Sure," I replied. "Take your time." Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she picked up her fork again. On the surface, we were still husband and wife sharing breakfast. Underneath, the ground between us was already cracking wide open, and I was the one holding the match. By Sunday night, the shape of my next move was clear. Proof wasn't just about photos, it was about words. And words, when recorded, could cut deeper than any image. I waited until Vanessa went upstairs to shower. The sound of running water covered my footsteps as I crossed to the small drawer in the office where I kept tech gear. Inside, wrapped in a microfiber cloth, was a compact digital recorder I'd bought years ago for work interviews, small enough to disappear on a bookshelf, sensitive enough to pick up whispers. I slipped in a fresh memory card, tested the mic with a quick tap, then switched it to voice-activated mode. Every sound over a whisper would trigger the recording. The placement was crucial, too obvious and she'd find it, too hidden and it might miss the conversation. I settled on the bookshelf in the living room, tucked between two hardcovers she never touched. From that vantage point, it had a perfect earshot of the couch and the sliding glass doors, the exact spot she and Ryan had used before. As I positioned it, I imagined the conversations it might catch. Her voice dropping low, his laugh, plans they thought were safe to speak aloud when they believed I wasn't listening. The water shut off upstairs. I stepped away, poured myself a drink, and settled into the armchair as if I'd been reading the whole time. When she came down, hair damp, wearing her favorite oversized sweater, she barely glanced at me before curling up on the couch with her phone. I didn't ask who she was texting. I didn't need to. The recorder's tiny red light blinked once, then went still, sleeping until the next sound woke it. For the rest of the evening, I kept my movements casual, my voice even, my eyes deliberately uninterested. The less I reacted, the safer she'd feel. The safer she felt, the more reckless she'd become. Later, when she finally went upstairs for the night, I stayed in the living room under the dim lamplight, pretending to scroll through emails. But in my head, I was already fast-forwarding to the moment I'd play back the files, when her own voice would seal the case against her. And that moment was coming. Soon, Monday morning came quiet and cold. Vanessa left the house a little after 9, dressed better than she usually did for grocery shopping, makeup, heels, hair perfectly set. She didn't take a list with her. She didn't need one for the errand she was really running. As soon as the front door closed, I gave it 2 minutes, then walked into the living room. The recorder sat exactly where I'd left it, invisible between the hardcovers. I pressed the playback button and let the machine work through the silence. 10 seconds in, her voice broke through, low, intimate. "I can't talk long, he's upstairs." Ryan's voice followed, faint but unmistakable. "I've been thinking about last night, couldn't get you out of my head." I sat down slowly, eyes locked on the blinking light. The audio was crisp. I could hear the small pauses in her breathing, the shift of fabric as she moved on the couch. "We have to be careful," she whispered. "I know," Ryan said, his tone almost smug. "But I want to see you again tonight." "You can't come here," she said quickly. "Not so soon after," she stopped herself. "We'll figure something out." The conversation drifted into half-sentences and laughter, nothing explicit enough for a courtroom yet, but more than enough to burn its way into memory. Then came the part that locked it in. "Vanessa, Ethan can't know if he ever found out." "Ryan, he won't. You're too smart for that." "Vanessa, we'll see." Her voice dropped even lower, almost a purr. "Last night was worth the risk." I stopped the recording there, thumb resting on the pause button. I could feel the tightness in my jaw, the cold coil of control winding tighter in my chest. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. It wasn't just photographs. Now I had her own voice, clear, undeniable, betraying her without a hint of hesitation. I slipped the recorder back into place, careful not to disturb a single book. By the time she came home, bags of groceries rattling like proof of her cover story, I was in my office typing up invoices as if nothing in the world had changed. But everything had. By Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Harold. "We need to meet. I've got something you'll want to see." We agreed on a small diner just outside of town, neutral ground, away from the eyes and ears of anyone who might know us. When I pulled into the lot, Harold was already there, sitting in a booth with a coffee in front of him and a thick manila envelope at his side. He didn't bother with small talk. As soon as I slid into the seat across from him, he pushed the envelope toward me. "Photos, timestamps, and a few extras," he said. "Your wife and her boyfriend are creatures of habit. That worked in our favor." I opened the flap and pulled out a stack of high-resolution prints. Each one was a punch to the gut, even though none of it surprised me anymore. Vanessa and Ryan at a hotel entrance, their bodies angled toward each other, faces lit with the kind of smile you save for someone you want. Another shot, Ryan's hand on the small of her back as they walked into a restaurant I recognized, one town over. Then came the kicker, a photo taken inside the hotel bar. Vanessa leaning in, her fingers grazing his wrist, her eyes fixed on him like he was the only man in the room. The date and time were printed in the corner, 9:42 p.m. Friday. I knew exactly where I'd been then, sitting at home, watching the clock, thinking she was out with friends. "That's just the appetizer," Harold said, sipping his coffee. "Flip to the last page." I did and froze. It was a receipt, room service for 2, champagne, dessert. Delivered to room 314, the name on the booking, Ryan Cole. I slid the papers back into the envelope, my movements calm even as my pulse pounded in my ears. "This is enough," I said quietly. Harold leaned in, lowering his voice. You've got her with photos, timestamps, and now financial proof. This isn't just a win, it's checkmate. When you drop this, she'll have nothing left to stand on. I nodded once, sliding the envelope into my briefcase. Then we make sure the drop hits hard. As I left the diner, the cold air felt sharper, cleaner. Each step back to my car carried more weight and more certainty. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was already over. She just didn't know it yet. Friday evening, I walked into the banquet hall like I belonged there. Because technically, I did. It was the annual charity gala, the one Vanessa loved to attend for the photos, the networking, the flattering dresses. I had bought our tickets weeks before, back when we was still a thing. The place shimmered with warm light and chatter, waiters gliding between tables with champagne flutes. At the far side of the room, Vanessa stood in a cluster of friends, wearing a silver gown I'd never seen before. It clung to her in all the ways she wanted to be noticed. Ryan was there, too, leaning casually against the bar, drink in hand, his eyes flicking toward her when he thought no one was watching. He didn't see me, not yet. When the speeches began, the host invited donors to the stage to thank them for their contributions. That was my moment. I stepped up, microphone in hand, the stage lights hot on my face. I want to share something tonight, I began, my voice steady, carrying over the quiet room. A story about loyalty, about trust, and about what happens when both are broken. I didn't name names at first. I let the tension build, talking about how betrayal hides in plain sight, how it wears the mask of routine. I could feel Vanessa's eyes on me from across the room. Then I pulled the photos from my briefcase and held them up. The projector caught them perfectly. Vanessa and Ryan at the hotel, time-stamped, undeniable. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone's champagne flute shattered on the floor. This, I said, tapping the photo, is what was happening while I was home, believing I had a marriage worth saving. I didn't need to say the rest. The room did it for me, murmurs, whispers, heads turning toward her. Ryan stiffened at the bar. Vanessa's face went pale, her mouth opening, but no sound coming out. I closed the folder, thanked the audience for their time, and stepped down from the stage. No one stopped me. No one dared. By the time I reached the doors, the buzz of the room had shifted, no longer polite conversation, but the kind of low, electric hum that follows a bomb going off. And this bomb had a name. Two, actually. By Monday morning, the ripples from Friday night had turned into a tidal wave. I didn't need to confront Ryan. Life was already doing the job for me. The first crack came at work. Ryan's company had a strict morality clause buried deep in their contracts. When the photos from the gala began circulating, shared by anonymous sources who just happened to copy the local business association, the clause was suddenly front and center. By noon, Ryan had been called into HR. By 3 p.m., he was escorted out with a cardboard box in his hands. I watched from my office window across the street, sipping coffee as he stood on the curb, phone to his ear, voice rising in frustration. He glanced around like a man trying to spot who had pulled the trigger. The next blow landed harder. Ryan's wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, had been sent the same envelope of evidence I'd used at the gala. She didn't waste time. Within 48 hours, she'd filed for divorce, citing infidelity and requesting full custody of their 2 kids. I knew because she called me, not to reconcile, not to commiserate, but to thank me. "You just saved me years of pretending," she said before hanging up. By Wednesday, Ryan's name had been quietly removed from his industry's networking boards. Mutual acquaintances stopped returning his calls. He'd gone from golden boy to pariah in less than a week. The last time I saw him, he was sitting alone at the far end of a dive bar, staring into a glass of something cheap. No silver watch, no tailored suit, just a man trying to drink the taste of his own downfall out of his mouth. He didn't notice me walk past, or maybe he did and didn't have the energy to react. Either way, I didn't stop. Some punishments don't need an audience. We met at a quiet cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one knew us and no one cared to. I'd chosen it deliberately, neutral ground, no memories, no history. Vanessa arrived 5 minutes late, wearing dark sunglasses despite the overcast sky. She slid into the seat across from me without taking them off. Her perfume drifted across the table, familiar and hollow at the same time. "Why here?" she asked, her voice low. "Because it's public," I said, stirring my coffee. "And because I don't want to be anywhere that feels like ours. We don't have an ours anymore." She flinched at that but didn't argue. For a moment we sat in silence, the only sound the hiss of the espresso machine and the faint clink of cups from behind the counter. I let the pause stretch, forcing her to fill it. "I know what you think you saw," she began. I cut her off with a single folder, sliding it across the table. "This isn't about what I think, it's about what I know." She didn't open it, she didn't have to. She'd seen those photos before, heard the recordings, felt the walls close in. "I'm not here to fight," I said. "I'm here to tell you what happens next. The divorce is already in motion. There will be no alimony, no claim to my business, and you will not use our children as leverage. You get what you came into this marriage with, nothing more." Her mouth tightened. "You can't just—" "I can," I said, my tone like steel. "And I have the proof to make it happen." She leaned back, crossing her arms, but the sunglasses couldn't hide the way her jaw clenched. "You were never perfect either." "True," I said, standing. "But I was faithful, that's the difference." I dropped a signed set of papers on the table, her copy of the settlement, and turned to leave. She didn't call after me. She didn't stand. She just sat there, a figure frozen in place while the rest of the cafe moved on around her. Outside, the air felt lighter, sharper. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was carrying something that could break me. I'd already let it go. Now it was just her turn to hold the weight. 2 days after the cafe meeting, I sent Vanessa a package. No return address, no note, just a plain, unmarked envelope. Inside was a single USB drive. I knew she'd plug it in. Curiosity was her fatal flaw. On that drive were 3 folders. The first contained the photographs, every image Harold had given me, organized by date and location. The second held the audio files from the hidden recorder, each labeled with the exact time she'd whispered to Ryan in our living room. The third folder was the real Blade. It was a compilation video I'd spent hours editing, blending the photos and audio together, intercut with clips of our children, laughing, playing, completely unaware of the storm hanging over them. The message wasn't subtle. This is what you risked. This is what you destroyed. I imagined her sitting at her desk, clicking through the files, her pulse quickening with every new piece of evidence. The images were bad enough. Hearing her own voice paired with the sound of Ryan's laugh would have been unbearable, but seeing it all framed by the faces of our kids, that was the twist. The phone rang that evening, her number. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was raw, unsteady. "You didn't have to do it like that." But I did. Because this wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about making sure she carried the weight of every choice, every lie, every night she thought she was safe. I saved the voicemail, not because I needed it, but because sometimes victory is best measured in silence, broken only by the sound of the other side realizing they've lost. The divorce papers were signed on a Thursday. No courtroom drama, no raised voices, just ink on paper and a quiet acknowledgement that what we once had was gone. When I stepped out of the courthouse, the air felt different. Not lighter exactly, more open. Like I'd been living in a room with no windows and someone had finally opened the blinds. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. The victory wasn't in the end itself. It was in surviving the path that led here. The next few weeks were quiet. I sold the old house, the one that had been equal parts home and battlefield, and moved into a place with wide windows and sunlight that spilled across the floors in the morning. No ghosts here, no shadows that whispered her name. I started running again. At first, just around the block, then further, mile after mile, until my lungs burned and my mind cleared. There's something about moving forward physically that makes it easier to do it emotionally. The kids adjusted faster than I expected. They laughed more, slept better. We cooked dinners together, burned a few, laughed it off. In those moments, I realized that while betrayal can take a lot from you, it doesn't get to take everything. One night, as I was cleaning up after dinner, my daughter handed me a drawing. It was the 3 of us, me, her, and her brother standing in front of our new place. Above us, in shaky handwriting, she'd written, "Home again." I pinned it to the fridge, not as a reminder of what I lost, but of what I still had and what I'd rebuilt. Life doesn't give you the option to go back, only to go on, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. And that's how it ended. Her bold betrayal met with a revenge she never saw coming. In the end, she walked away with nothing while I reclaimed not just my life, but my peace. Betrayal always has a price, and sometimes the one who pays never sees the bill until it's too late. What would you have done in my place? Share your thoughts below. I read every comment. This is Cheating Stories 7. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more unforgettable tales of betrayal and revenge.